I am Asian American, but I am not a virus. My name is Daisy Trung, and this is my series called I Am, But I Am Not. Journey with me as we explore the different stereotypes and misconceptions of Asian Americans that I've seen and experienced myself. With the amplification of anti-Asian sentiment during COVID-19 and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, I will uncover and debunk those myths and share with you the inside view on the thoughts, opinions, and experiences of those within our society. We're going to start with your I am but I am not statement.
I am gay, but I'm not a stereotype.
Start off with introductions. What is your name? Describe your occupation and your ethnicity.
My name is Stanley Sakai. I am currently a full-time software engineer. I used to be a stenographer, but I mostly do that as a freelance worker now. And my ethnicity is Korean.
And do you have an ethnic name? Is there a story behind it?
My ethnic name, I guess, is my middle name, which is Harry, or Heri, if you say it in Korean. And there is a story behind it because the Chinese characters of He and Ri, it can be interpreted as sea town, or it can be interpreted as nautical mile. And so I guess the story goes that my grandfather, who was dying in Korea, named me that because I was the child who was born in the town over the ocean from Korea, in America. And or you have to travel nautical miles to see me, basically. So, yeah.
Could you tell us about your upbringing, what was growing up like, what your family was like?
I was born in Burbank, California, and then my mom divorced my biological dad before I was born. And so my mom remarried, and we basically lived in Southern California for the first 11 years of my life. And then we moved to Wisconsin, lived there for 5 years, and then moved to Seattle. And then I basically spent all of my high school and college in Seattle. I went to University of Washington, and then my parents eventually moved back down to Southern California because of family issues, and so that my brother and sister could have better access to universities. And yeah, it's just been a ride, but I currently live in New York City. So after college, I lived in Seattle for a little bit and then moved to New York and haven't looked back.
Cool. Just going back to a little bit on your childhood, what was school life like? Do you feel like you didn't belong because of your race at all?
I would say there were different points at which that was kind of an issue. In California, less so. I didn't really feel that out of place. It definitely helped, in Southern California, there's a lot of Asian representation. And at that point, I didn't know I was gay, so it's whatever. But when we did move to Wisconsin, that was something that does stick out in my mind as kind of a period in my life where I had to face discrimination for the first time and kind of experience what it's actually like to be that much more different than others. And I do think that my experiences living in Wisconsin kind of shaped who I was because, there was a fair amount of bullying, not only for my strange hairstyle and strange dress, but also because I guess I acted a little more feminine than other boys and stuff. So that was something that could be easily picked up by, the kids because kids are awful. I was definitely bullied there. And that all kind of changed. Also when we moved to Seattle, I was a little older. So it wasn't kind of that terrible period with awful children just being mean. People were a little bit more mature. And, of course, Seattle has pretty good Asian representation. So I didn't feel as excluded, so to speak. So.
And how was your relationship with other students of color, people of color in general, while you were growing up?
I didn't really think about it when I was in California because I was kind of too young to really understand racial dynamics. And then in Wisconsin, like I said, it was more of an issue and I had to get thicker skin. Basically, it taught me to be just less prone to letting things like that bother me. When I was in Seattle though, after moving there, I feel like I had my American friends and then I had Latino friends. And actually during high school was like the period I got really, really good at Spanish. I speak Spanish basically fluently still to this day. And so I don't know, like I kind of belong to multiple cultures, not just like being an Asian American. I still listen to Latin music. I speak Spanish to friends and, use it when I'm like in a Spanish speaking environment. And, of course, like I had African American friends, I had Indian friends, like from India kind of thing. Thank God we moved to Seattle. It was so much better than our time in Wisconsin. Yeah, I feel like I've taken on many identities. So yeah, Asian American is definitely just one of them.
I'm kind of making this docu-series trying to figure out anti-Blackness within the Asian community. Do you remember your first experience with a Black person?
I can't say I remember my first experience with Black person. Recently, there was a TikTok that went viral, and it was a Black woman who was talking about don't buy into like Asian Americans' rhetoric. They're all like secretly racist. They're not true allies kind of thing. And I kind of bit back and I was like, well, what is your definition of an ally then? Why are you so cantankerous? Her video was like her up in arms. I'm like, why are you so angry kind of thing? Digging through the comments and talking to other Black folk, there does seem to be an issue with Asian owned stores that Black people patronize, right? And, they're not always kind to these patrons. It was kind of eye-opening because like I knew it was an issue, but I didn't know it was like as big of an issue, or at least understood as that big of an issue by the Black community at large. I just thought like, she was just whining and saying nonsense at first. But, later I kind of like dug into it and I talked to some actual people who have experienced this kind of thing. And they're like, actually it's an issue. However, at the same time, like, I'm not quite sure how to approach it anymore because, we're both minorities. And while the issues that we face as groups separately are completely different, I can't help but say like, this is something that may have been postured in a way so that there's more in-group fighting with the minorities, right? Rather than targeting, what's actually undermining all of us, which is white supremacy and capitalism, basically. Like through this whole interaction, I've learned to kind of respect the nuance that does exist because yes, this is an issue that affects Black communities. And then, in talking to some of my Asian friends, also a lot of these stores that have things that Black people need, like hair products or, very like specific types of products that pretty much they as a community only use, are supplied in a large part by Asian companies or Asian suppliers. If you are an Asian American immigrant who has a store like that in the US, perhaps you might have better connections or ability to acquire those products cheaply. Sometimes it's framed by Black people as an invasion. Like, why are there so many of these hair care stores and stuff that are owned by Asians? It should be owned by Black people. And so like, it's so complex. I just think that there's like tension that I've come to learn about, but I think in my life, I haven't really experienced that much tension or anything really with Black people. So like, it's just okay. But, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't educate myself about it, which I have. It's really complex, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And have you had these conversations about anti-Blackness with your own family or in your community at all?
I wouldn't say with my family per se. I think it also because individually, we are all pretty well removed from that kind of dynamic. I'm not gonna lie, like our family is pretty well off. None of us own these kinds of stores or have any relatives or any, next of kin that is involved in that. So I can't really speak to that because we are so far removed from it. However, I do have talks about this with my Black friends in New York because, I think we're a little more on the ground and a little more like interacting with the community, which we're both a part of, right? As Asian Americans and Black people. So I do have it with like my friends, but not really with my family, I guess.
Okay. Do you think that your intersectionality with your queer and Asian American identity affect your view on anti-Blackness in any way?
Yes, I do think so. My queerness definitely affects it because a lot of what we owe as the LGBTQ plus community goes directly to like Black trans people. Like they paved the way for all of us minorities, whether it just be like gay or gay plus ethnicity or gay plus ethnicity and gender identity. Like they paved the way. Like they were the ones out fighting. They're the ones out risking their life and limb to make sure that, you know, our voices were heard. And, you know, that's what Pride is all about. Pride is a celebration, but it's a riot. And we can never forget that. And I think that in a sense that my queerness has made me a lot closer to the Black community and everything that they stand for, because it's like, in the end, like we are all fighting for the same thing. And it's part of why like I had such a hard time kind of like grokking when there were so many voices saying like the Asian community is not with us, they're against us kind of thing. And I'm like, why are we like doing this? Because, you know, I've always had this close relationship with the Black community, plus like the queer Black community, and plus a lot of culture in the queer community comes directly from Black American culture. So can't like forget that. In the end, nothing but respect, more respect. So
It's good. Have you ever felt like you've been discriminated against because of your race or your sexuality?
I will say like consciously no, but like there probably have been instances where I've been discriminated against. For instance, yesterday when my boyfriend and I were driving up, I'm currently in Sacramento right now, but we had to drive through Bakersfield. We went to the gym there in kind of a dodgy area, and we got lots of luck and stuff. I think like people were just trying to figure out how we were related, because it's like I did notice that like in Bakersfield at that gym in particular, it was a little more racially segregated. Like, you know, the white guys only had white guy friends, and like, you know, the Hispanics looked like they only had Hispanic friends, and like the only two Asians there were together kind of thing. And so it was like little like weird to see like these two guys, one Asian, one white, both in booty shorts, sharing the same water bottle. Where actually we were wearing matching masks as well. So like that wasn't like discrimination, but it definitely felt like uncomfortable, I guess. I honestly can't really say I've ever felt discriminated specifically because I'm gay or Asian or together. I mean, yeah, there are just like times where I feel out of place kind of thing, but I don't think I've ever felt singled out.
And what are your thoughts on the model minority myth?
I think in general, the model minority myth can be toxic. And I think in addition to being Asian and gay, and for the longest time, just like not really knowing my place in the world, I also had ADHD, undiagnosed pretty much, all through high school and parts of college. And when you have the model minority myth, it affects people who don't have the resources to perform the way that people are saying that you should be performing, right? Or people don't actually say it, but like performing in a way that is expected based on what is either happening around you or what you hear should be happening. And, you know, also when you have a learning disability, then that just like fucks everything up. It makes it even worse. And then I just think that like it's kind of toxic for the Asian American community. You know, if you just put aside the fact that like Asian Americans make like the highest income of all minority groups in America, like just put that aside and just think about how that kind of, you know, mentality will affect children, teenagers. And I don't like it. I think it's horrible in some ways, but sometimes there are benefits. You know, as a minority, if you're an Asian American, you don't have to worry about being like chased down in a store or like followed. You don't really have to worry about the cops being like merely just like walking around, you know, with like a big bag or something on the subway. I don't really have to worry about like the cops looking at me. Whereas when we were getting off the air train, I saw this guy trying to get into the subway. He looked African American and he had two very, very large bags at the turnstile. I was watching the cops. They were just like all looking at him. And I'm like, would they be looking at me as hard if I were the one going through because, you know, I'm Asian and not Black kind of thing. There are times where like you can use the model minority stereotype to your advantage as an Asian person. But overall, I think it's pretty deleterious for people growing up in this society and, you know, kind of being expected to be like overachieving. can we just like be normal? Just like let people live. So yeah.
Did you ever feel like that stereotype was placed onto you, or if you ever felt that while you were growing up or
Yes.
now?
Yeah. When I was in school in Wisconsin, so there was like this new math program being introduced. It was this new like contextual based math system rather than like straight up arithmetic. They like took all the kids in the 6th grade, right? And they asked us, do you want to be in the advanced math class or do you want to be in like the regular math class? And I said regular math class, and the teachers all basically were like, no, we think you should be in the advanced one. You know, they obviously like consulted my parents too. They like called, and my mom was like, oh yeah, he should be in the advanced one. I was like fucking failing that thing like the entire time. I was like, help, help, help. I don't know what I'm doing. And they did like, no one listened to me. And they were just like, no, you need to be in the advanced one. You're too smart for this. And I'm like, no, but I actually can't do it. And I'm still to this day, I'm like so bad at math. That was like one moment where I can definitely say, oh yeah, they were like, you are better at math than you think you are. We're gonna just put you here involuntarily. And then, you know, I proceed to just like fail because it wasn't helpful, right? Like I wasn't being taught. I was being just like expected to perform. And I'm like, are you kidding? Yeah, that's one example. I don't know if you need more.
So just moving on to like the current situation, you know, with the shooting that happened in Georgia, what are your thoughts on the rise of violence against Asian Americans because of COVID-19 and the current rhetoric that is being put out there right now?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's a little scary, especially living in such a, I mean, like it's not a hotspot, but it's definitely a major metropolitan area in New York City. There are definitely times where I walk out and I'm like, you don't know what's gonna happen. There's this running joke I have with like my boyfriend, because I do run at night. Sometimes like that's the only time when I can run. And I'm very adamant that I get my exercise in. And sometimes when I'm leaving the apartment, I'll just be like, hope I don't get hate crimed. Bye. You know, it's in jest the way that I said it, but at the same time, one can't help but think, you know, is this the time that I get shot in the leg when I'm like running, minding my own fucking business? As far as like the actual shooting that happened in Georgia, one thing that angered me, how the white attacker got a face, a name and a face in the media, whereas these women who died were just women. And people were arguing like, were they Korean? And they had to like get info from the Korean consulate. They were indeed South Korean nationals. And I'm like, okay, why don't you just publish the names? And then it took them a really long time to actually do so. I just thought it was fucking weird that they would give this fucking murderer a platform and not the women. And then, you know, later it got a little rougher, but still I'm like, you know, I work in media tech, so I'm like, we can do better. Like, why is this so bad right now? But yeah, it was freaking unfortunate event. Another thing that like kind of bothers me is the kind of like, I made a TikTok about this, but like kind of the clinicalization of racism in the US, how it's not a hate crime unless X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, alpha, beta, delta. Why do you have to fill in all these boxes in order for it to be a hate crime? Like, just because you have a person who committed an act without explicit evidence or without him or her saying that it was explicitly a racist act doesn't mean that that act cannot have racist consequences. In this case, he called himself a sex addict. You know, of course, the media just went wild with that and just like took it down the street and was like, okay, yeah, he's just a sex addict and not racially motivated. But think about how our people are represented in American media. Asian women are sexual objects. They're thought of as these subservient China dolls that they're for white men's pleasure. And then Asian men are emasculated. They are thought to be a sexless, nerds, perpetually foreign. Like no one ever wants to be with the Asian guy. Once you like kind of take in all the different factors, like him saying he's a sex addict, targeting only these salons, which is so fucking stereotypically a sex outlet specifically associated with Asian women, you know, just it's just like, no, this was racially motivated. I'm sorry. Stop nitpicking. Everyone on the news, no, you're wrong. It was mostly confusing at first and, obviously disheartening, but I don't know. I can't expect more from America these days, so whatever.
But I mean, that leads into kind of my next question of, with your background in media and you having a TikTok platform, how do you think the media has been handling it on the different platforms?
So I actually dropped off of Instagram a few months ago. I've been just getting updates from my boyfriend and other friends saying that presence on Instagram has been very heavy. Every other story, every other post has all been about the shooting when it happened. I will say that I think the creators on TikTok have done a great job of portraying all the kind of the different sides of it. I think there's a sense of realness with TikTok that doesn't exist with Instagram. Whereas I don't know, I looked through a few stuff on Instagram. It was just, the typical bulleted lists on a pretty pastel background with a cute font kind of info series format. I will say that on the traditional media front, I'm still kind of disappointed the way that they've handled it. My company has done, I think, a pretty good job of covering it. They made sure that the person reporting it is Asian American. So I work for Vox. We have a bunch of employee resource groups in our company, and the Asian American one was definitely consulted when this news was happening, and they held a lot of support groups and stuff. I would say that outside of kind of the left-leaning liberal sphere, I'm not too happy about it, but I like the more organic news outlets handling of it, definitely. And of course, TikTok.
How do you think this, I don't really like the word resurgence, but this anti-Asian racism because of COVID-19 kind of intersects with the Black Lives Matter movement?
I think it's weird and confusing just because who would have expected this? And also I feel a little bit removed from the anti-Asian sentiment just because it's mostly directed toward Chinese Americans. And I am not Chinese, so I can't really speak to that. However, obviously it affects people who look like us. So I would say that I think this is a great way that we can all band together as minorities and become stronger together than separate. However, I understand that A, there's a lot of nuance to that, and B, the force of capitalism, the force of white supremacy that's trying to tear us apart. As a whole, I think despite the tragedies that had to occur to bring us to this point, I think that as minorities, this is our time to shine. We need to come together and fight as one unit, as one battalion. And I think right now is we're so ripe for it. We are so ripe to be able to do that. And people just need to see beyond their differences, just accept and come to a mutual understanding that we're not the enemy to Black people. Black people are not our enemy. It's the system. The sooner people realize that, the more progress we can make and the happier we'll be. We still have ways to go to make that happen, but everything takes time. But I think we'll get there. And just seeing how much progress we've made in these few short months since George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, now this, I think we have the capacity to. It's a matter of acting on it.
Okay, and then just to wrap up, what is one thing you would want viewers to take away from your interview?
Okay, the main thing I would say is that just because you look a certain way doesn't really mean much. People would look at me, they wouldn't know that I speak fluent Spanish. They wouldn't know I speak fluent Dutch. They wouldn't know I know sign language. They wouldn't know that I'm gay, but well, actually you might be able to tell that, but identify with so many different identities, and this all just sounds very self-serving because I'm oh yeah, I'm so complex. But things are not what they seem, and everyone should approach any interaction that they have with another human being as things are not what they seem, and keep an open mind about everything because you just never know. So yeah, that's pretty much it.